At my son's wedding, my new daughter-in-law grabbed the microphone during her speech and said, "My husband's mother is a working-class embarrassment. Thank God he escaped that life." The entire ballroom laughed. Then her mother stood up and added, "Some people are meant to do great things. Others are meant to support them. She's always known her place." My son sat there, silent, but one person didn't laugh, and what he did next changed everything. What's up, everyone? So glad you're here. Do me a favor, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Oh, and quick disclaimer, this story has some made-up details to keep things interesting and protect real identities, so any similarities to actual people or places are totally random. But trust me, the life lessons here, completely real. All right, let's jump in. I'm Helen Bradford, 60 years old, a retired elementary school librarian, and a widow. 5 weeks ago at my son's wedding, I sat at a table near the kitchen doors while 220 guests celebrated around me. The ballroom at the Sentinel Hotel was beautiful crystal chandeliers, white roses everywhere, the kind of elegant affair you see in magazines. My son Lucas looked handsome in his tuxedo. His bride Ashton was radiant in a dress that cost more than I make in 6 months. And then she grabbed the microphone. "Helen is a working-class embarrassment," she announced to the room, her voice amplified and confident. Thank God Lucas escaped that life. The laughter that followed felt like a physical blow. 220 people laughing at the woman who raised the groom, laughing at me. But there was one person who didn't laugh. And what he did next changed everything. Before I tell you that part, though, I need you to understand who I was before I walked into that ballroom. You need to know what I sacrificed and why those words cut so deep. If you want to hear this story, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, please subscribe to this channel. So let me take you back to where this really started. 10 years ago. The oncologist's office had those fluorescent lights that make everything look gray. Robert sat beside me, his hand covering mine, while a doctor we'd never met before explained that 18 months was optimistic. Stage 4, aggressive, inoperable. We'll make him comfortable. The words didn't feel real. They felt like something from a TV show, something that happened to other people. I was 50 years old and I was about to lose my husband. Robert Bradford had worked at the same manufacturing plant for 28 years. Started on the line, worked his way up to supervisor. Steady paycheck, good benefits, a pension we'd been counting on. He coached Little League on weekends. He grew yellow roses in our backyard, his pride and joy. He called me darling every single morning for 26 years. And when the doctor told us he had 18 months, Robert squeezed my hand and said, "Well, then we'd better make them count." He fought that illness like he'd never fought anything in his life. For 18 months, I watched the strongest man I'd ever known grow weaker. Our son Lucas was 22, finishing his junior year at Portland State. Computer science major, full scholarship, but living expenses were adding up. Lucas would come home on weekends trying to be strong, trying to help, but I could see the fear in his eyes every time he looked at his father. Robert lasted 17 months. 1 month short of the doctor's prediction. By the end, there was $75,000 left from his life insurance policy. Everything we'd built together over 28 years, the house was paid off, thank God, but that was it. $75,000, a number on a page. In those final moments, Robert, in our bedroom, because he'd refused a hospice, said he wanted to be home in the bed we'd shared for 26 years. He could barely speak. His voice was a whisper. But he squeezed my hand with what little strength he had left and looked at me with those blue eyes I'd fallen in love with when I was 23. "Take care of our boy," he whispered. His voice was so thin I had to lean close to hear him. "You're the strongest woman I know, Helen. Promise me." I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Tears were streaming down my face, but I nodded. "I promise," I finally managed. "I'll make sure he has everything. I'll make sure he finishes school. I'll take care of him." Robert smiled, just barely, the smallest curve of his lips. "I know you will, darling." And then he closed his eyes, and he was gone. Just like that, at 50 years old, I became a widow. I took every penny of that $75,000 and put it toward Lucas's education, his final year of college, his living expenses, books, everything. He graduated debt-free in the spring of 2016 while I picked up extra tutoring shifts at the community center and weekend hours at the public library. I didn't mind. I'd promised Robert. And I'd have worked 3 jobs if that's what it took. For 10 years, I kept that promise. I sacrificed everything to make sure Lucas had opportunities we'd never had. I watched him succeed, get his degree, land a good job in tech, move up the ladder, make more money than Robert and I had ever seen. And I was proud. So proud. I just didn't know that one day that success, that life I'd worked so hard to give him, would make him ashamed of where he came from, ashamed of me. The years after Robert passed were the hardest of my life, but I'd do them all over again. Because those were the years I proved to myself and to Robert's memory that I could keep my promise. In 2014, I was 50 years old and starting over. The mortgage was paid off, thank God, but there were still bills. And Lucas's final year at Portland State wasn't cheap, even with that insurance money covering tuition. So I picked up extra shifts. I'd been working at Woodlawn Elementary's library for almost 20 years, but the school district's budget didn't leave much room for raises. So Tuesday and Thursday evenings, I tutored ESL students at the community center, $20 an hour. Sometimes I'd get home at 9 at night, my feet aching, my voice hoarse. On weekends, I worked the reference desk at the public library. The pay wasn't much better, but it helped. And honestly, I didn't mind. Books had always been my refuge. My life became small in those years, deliberately small. I lived in our house in St. John's, a working-class neighborhood in North Portland, where the houses are modest but the gardens are loved. I grew vegetables in the backyard, the same plot where Robert used to grow his roses. I went to church on Sundays at the little Methodist congregation where we'd baptized Lucas. It was a quiet life, a simple life, and I was content with it. In May of 2016, Lucas graduated from Portland State with a degree in computer science. I sat in the crowd at the Moda Center in a dress I'd found on clearance at Macy's $35 navy blue, nothing fancy. I watched my son walk across that stage, and I thought about Robert, how proud he would have been. When Lucas found me afterward, his eyes were wet. "We did it, Mom," he said, hugging me tight. "You did it, sweetheart," I corrected him. 3 months later, he got his first real job, a software engineering position at a tech startup downtown, $65,000 a year, more money than Robert had ever made as a supervisor. Lucas wanted to help me financially. I wouldn't let him. "Save your money," I told him. "Build your future. Get yourself an apartment, start a savings account. That's what your father wanted." And he did. He moved into a small studio in Southeast Portland, bought his first car that wasn't falling apart, started building the kind of life I'd only dreamed of for him. I was so proud I could have burst. By 2018, he'd been promoted twice. He was making $95,000 a year, senior engineer. He was 26 years old and already successful beyond anything Robert and I had imagined. He came over on a Saturday in October to tell me about the promotion. I made his favorite dinner pot roast the way Robert used to make it and baked a chocolate cake from scratch. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he'd done his homework as a kid. And then he reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom," he said, his voice thick, "I couldn't have done any of this without you. Everything I have, everything I've accomplished, it's because you sacrificed everything to give me a chance." I squeezed his hand, tears blurring my vision. "Your father would be so proud of you, Lucas. He'd be proud of you too, Mom, for keeping your promise." That was the last time Lucas looked at me like I was someone to be proud of. 3 years later, in the spring of 2021, he met a woman at a networking event downtown. Her name was Ashton Whitmore, and everything changed. Lucas called me on a Tuesday night in April. His voice had that bright, breathless quality I hadn't heard in years. "Mom," he said, "I met someone special. Her name was Ashton. 26, 3 years younger than Lucas, marketing director at some luxury brand downtown. They'd met at a tech networking event. She's amazing, Mom. Smart, successful, beautiful." I think you're really going to like her." 2 weeks later, Lucas brought her to St. John's for dinner. I'd cleaned the house until it gleamed, put fresh flowers from my garden on the kitchen table, made my pot roast the one Lucas had loved since he was little. When the doorbell rang at 6, I opened the door to find Ashton Whitmore standing on my porch. She was beautiful, tall and slender with honey blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She wore cream-colored pants that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe and a silk blouse that looked like it had never been washed at home. Her makeup was perfect. Her smile was perfect. "Mrs. Bradford," she said, extending a manicured hand. "It's so lovely to finally meet you." "Please call me Helen," I said. "Come in." She stepped into my living room and I watched her eyes sweep the space. The worn couch Robert and I had bought in 1995, the bookshelf made from cinder blocks and planks, the Afghans my mother had crocheted. What a cozy home. Ashton said, her smile never wavering. Very quaint. The word hung in the air. Quaint, like she was describing a roadside antique shop. "Thanks," I said. "It's not much, but it's been home for 30 years. At dinner, I served the pot roast with roasted carrots and mashed potatoes. Comfort food. Ashton looked at her plate like I'd served her something questionable. "This looks hearty," she said. I should have mentioned I'm gluten-free and dairy-free, and I don't really eat red meat. Lucas shifted uncomfortably. "Ash, you didn't tell me." "It's fine," I said quickly. "I can make you a salad." "Oh, don't go to any trouble," Ashton said, waving her hand. "I'll just pick at the vegetables." She ate maybe 3 bites. After dinner, I was in the kitchen loading the dishwasher when I heard their voices from the living room. The walls in this house are thin. "Your mom is sweet," Ashton said. "Very simple." I froze hands in the soapy water. "She's had a hard life," Lucas replied, his voice gentle, almost apologetic. "My dad passed when I was in college. She's been on her own. She's doing her best." "Of course," Ashton said. "It's admirable. Really." But the way she said admirable, it didn't sound like admiration at all. I stood there, water dripping from my hands, and felt something cold settle in my chest. I told myself I was being paranoid. Ashton was lovely, polite, successful. The comment about my home being quaint was probably meant as a compliment. The thing about the food was just dietary restrictions, not judgment. Maybe I was reading too much into things. Maybe I was being the overprotective mother who couldn't accept that her son was dating someone out of her league. But mothers have instincts, and mine was screaming. This woman didn't see me as family. She didn't even see me as a person worth knowing. She saw me as background noise in Lucas's life story, as something embarrassing he'd outgrown, as an obstacle between him and the life she thought he deserved. She saw me as something to overcome. 8 months after Lucas started dating Ashton, he called to tell me he'd proposed. I found out 3 days after it happened. "Mom, I have amazing news," he said, his voice bright. "I asked Ashton to marry me." She said yes. My heart should have soared. Instead, it stumbled. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I managed. "When did this happen?" "Saturday night. I took her to Cannon Beach at sunset. It was perfect." "Saturday. 3 days ago. We had a celebration dinner last night," he continued, "at the Whitmore's place in the West Hills. Just family, you know? Just family." The words sat heavy in my chest. "I'm family too, Lucas," I said quietly. A pause. "I know, Mom. Next time, okay." But there wasn't a next time. 6 months later, the Whitmores threw an engagement party at their estate. This time I was invited. The house was massive, one of those modern places in the West Hills with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Portland. The driveway alone was bigger than my entire front yard. Valets were parking cars. A string quartet played on the terrace. There must have been 100 guests, women in cocktail dresses that cost more than my car payment. Men in blazers discussing startups and investments and vacation homes in Bend. I wore a simple navy dress from Nordstrom Rack. $30. I'd spent an hour that morning trying to make it look more expensive. It didn't work. I felt like I was wearing a sign that said, "Doesn't belong." A young woman with a clipboard and a perfect smile directed me to table 16, back corner near the French doors that led to the garden. "Enjoy the evening," she said brightly, already looking past me to the next guest. The people at table 16 were distant Whitmore relatives I'd never met, a retired banker and his wife, a cousin who worked in commercial real estate. They smiled politely when I sat down, introduced themselves, then returned to their own conversations about market trends and someone's new boat. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, a glass of champagne I didn't drink in front of me, and watched. From where I sat, I could see the head table clearly. Lucas and Ashton at the center, glowing and radiant. Both sets of parents flanked them. Richard Whitmore, tall and imposing in an expensive charcoal suit. Camilla Whitmore, dripping in jewelry that caught the light every time she moved. They looked like a magazine spread. Perfect. Untouchable. A photographer moved around the table, adjusting angles, capturing moments. The happy couple. The parents leaning in, laughing at something Richard said. The whole family together. Nobody called for me. I sat at table 16 and told myself it was fine. They'd call for me later, for family photos. Surely they'd want the groom's mother in at least one picture. They didn't. An hour passed. The photographer moved on to candid shots of guests. I remained at table 16, smiling when someone made eye contact, pretending I wasn't being erased. "Excuse me." I looked up to find a man standing beside my table. Early 30s, brown hair, kind eyes. He wore a gray suit that looked comfortable rather than expensive. "You're Lucas's mom, right?" he said. "I'm Isaac Fletcher, his best man." "Helen," I said, shaking his hand. "I'm his college roommate." Isaac explained, pulling out the empty chair beside me. "He talks about you all the time, actually. Says you're the reason he made it through school." Something in my chest loosened just a little. We talked for 15 minutes. He told me about his physical therapy practice downtown. I told him about my 30 years at Woodlawn Elementary's library. He asked about Lucas as a kid, and I shared stories the time Lucas tried to organize all my books by color instead of author, the way he'd fall asleep reading in the car that made Isaac laugh. For those 15 minutes, I felt seen. Then Isaac's phone buzzed. "I'm sorry," he said, standing. "Best man duties, speech prep. But it was really nice talking to you, Mrs. Bradford." "Helen," I corrected gently. He smiled. "Helen." And then he was gone, and I was alone again at table 16. 4 months before the wedding, I got a call from Janet Reeves, a friend from my church. "Helen," she said carefully, "did you get invited to Ashton's bridal shower?" My stomach dropped. "What bridal shower?" "Oh, honey." Janet sighed. "My neighbor's daughter mentioned it. This Saturday at some spa in the Pearl District. I just assumed you'd be going." How many people are invited?" I heard around 40 women, and I wasn't one of them. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that call, staring at the phone in my hand. Then I called Lucas. "Sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I just heard about Ashton's bridal shower. I didn't receive an invitation." "Oh." He sounded genuinely surprised. "Really? Maybe it got lost in the mail." "Lucas, it's this Saturday. 40 women were invited. That doesn't sound like a small oversight." A long pause. "I'll talk to Ashton. I'm sure we can figure this out." "Please," I said quietly. "I want to be part of this. I know Mom. I'll handle it." But he didn't talk to her, or if he did, nothing changed. The shower happened without me. I should have said something then, should have demanded that Lucas see what was happening. But I didn't want to be the difficult mother-in-law. Didn't want to make waves. Didn't want to risk pushing my son away. So I stayed silent, and I kept trying to be part of their lives, even as they made it clearer and clearer that I wasn't welcome. Even after being excluded from the bridal shower, I still wanted to contribute. 3 months before the wedding, I made a decision. I'd been setting aside money for years. Not much, $20 here, $50 there, whenever I could spare it. By the time Lucas got engaged, I had $5,000 saved. It had taken me almost a decade to save that much. It represented countless extra tutoring sessions, weekend library shifts, dinners of scrambled eggs so I could put a little more away. I knew it wasn't much compared to what the Whitmores were spending on the wedding. Lucas had mentioned the budget once over $150,000. My $5,000 was a drop in that ocean, but it mattered to me. I called Lucas on a Tuesday evening in January. "Sweetheart," I said, "I know the Whitmores are handling most of the wedding expenses, but I want to contribute something. I have $5,000 saved. It's yours for the wedding, or for your future, or however you want to use it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mom," he said finally, and his voice sounded thick. That's really generous. Are you sure that's a lot of money?" "I'm sure. You're my son. This is important to me." "Let me talk to Ashton," he said. "See where we can use it. Maybe for the honeymoon fund, or I'll figure it out. Thank you, Mom, really." I hung up feeling lighter than I had in months. Finally, I could be part of this. Finally, I could show them that I wanted to support their future, that I wasn't just some difficult mother-in-law trying to insert myself where I didn't belong. A week later, Lucas called back. "So about the money," he started, and I could hear the awkwardness in his voice. "Ashton says her parents really have everything covered. They don't want you to worry about contributing. They know it's a lot for you and they want to take care of it." The lightness I'd felt evaporated. "Lucas, this isn't about worry. This is about pride. I'm your mother. I want to be part of this. I know Mom, but they're very particular about how things are handled. They have a whole system with the vendors and everything. It might just complicate things." $5,000 complicates things?" He sighed. "Let me talk to her again, okay? I should have left it there. Should have taken the hint. But I couldn't. 2 days later, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote out a check. $5,000. I tucked it into a card, one with a simple design, nothing fancy, and wrote a short note inside. "For your future together. All my love, Helen." I mailed it directly to Ashton at the address Lucas had given me months ago. 2 weeks passed. Nothing. I told myself she was busy. Wedding planning was stressful. Maybe the card had gotten lost in all the chaos. Then late one evening, my phone buzzed with a text message. "Got your check, thanks." That was it. 5 words. No warmth, no gratitude, just acknowledgement. I stared at the screen for a long time. I thought about calling Lucas. Thought about asking if Ashton had mentioned the check, if they'd decided how to use it, if it meant anything to them. But I didn't call. I sat in Robert's old armchair with my phone in my hand and told myself I was reading too much into a text message. People were busy. People were casual with texts. It didn't mean anything. I thought my gesture meant something. I thought maybe finally I was being included. That $5,000, nearly a decade of saving, was my way of saying, "I'm here. I support you. I'm part of this family." I had no idea what they were really saying about me behind closed doors. Not yet. The night before the wedding, I drove across the river to the Sentinel Hotel with my hands tight on the wheel and a cautious kind of hope in my chest. I'd bought a navy pantsuit at Macy's for $85 on sale and spent $30 at the salon for a trim and blow dry. Nothing fancy, just neat, respectable. I wanted to blend in, to belong, to be part of this milestone without causing a fuss. The rehearsal dinner was in a private room off the main lobby, maybe 40 people. The Whitmores had flown in family from Connecticut and New York. Lucas's college friends clustered near the bar. I recognized Isaac Fletcher right away. He gave me a small, warm nod from across the room. Ashton stood near the entrance in a champagne-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She greeted guests with a practiced smile, air-kissing cheeks, and laughing at all the right moments. When I walked in, her gaze swept over me. The smile stayed in place, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. "Oh, Helen," she said loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "That's a look." I felt my face heat. I thought it was appropriate. She tilted her head, her expression dripping with false sweetness. "Of course, very librarian chic." A few people laughed, not loudly, just enough to sting. Lucas was standing right there. He heard it. I saw the flicker of discomfort cross his face, but he didn't say anything. He just touched Ashton's elbow gently as if to steer her away, and she leaned into him with a soft, victorious smile. I stood there, frozen, my purse clutched in both hands. Then Isaac was beside me. "That was out of line," he said quietly. I forced a smile. "She's just stressed. Big day tomorrow." "That wasn't stress," Isaac said, his voice firm. "That was mean." I blinked, startled by his bluntness. "You should say something," he added. "I don't want to make things worse." "Worse than what?" He looked at me with something close to frustration. "Helen, there's no middle ground here. Either you matter or you don't." I didn't know how to answer that. Dinner was served at a long table. Ashton and Lucas sat at the center, flanked by the Whitmores and the wedding party. I was seated at the far end next to a cousin of Richard Whitmore's who spent the entire meal on his phone. I picked at my salmon and tried to look like I was having a good time. Across the table, Ashton laughed at something her father said. Lucas smiled beside her, his hand resting on hers. They looked perfect together, happy, like a couple in a magazine, and I looked like the wrong piece in the wrong puzzle. After dinner, I found Isaac near the lobby. "Thank you," I said, "for earlier." He shook his head. "You don't have to thank me for basic decency." "Still," I said softly, "it meant something." He studied me for a moment, then sighed. "You deserve better than this, Helen?" I nodded, but I didn't believe him. Not really. I drove home through the dark streets of Portland, replaying the evening in my head. The insult, the laughter, Lucas's silence. I thought about Robert, about the way he used to look at me when we were young, like I was the only person in the room who mattered. "Never let anyone make you feel small, darling," he'd told me once. But I had let them, over and over again, because I didn't want to be difficult, because I wanted to be liked, because I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, they'd see my value. Tomorrow was the wedding. Tomorrow, I told myself, things would be different. Tomorrow, I'd be part of the family, part of the pictures, part of the celebration. I was wrong. Tomorrow would be worse than anything I could have imagined. On the morning of Lucas's wedding, I woke at 5:30, excited and afraid in equal measure. I laid out the navy dress I'd bought for $120, simple, knee-length, appropriate, and fastened the strand of pearls Robert had given me on our last anniversary, his final gift. I touched them gently the way I used to touch his hand. In the mirror, I whispered, "You look fine." Robert would say, "You look beautiful." I drove myself to the Sentinel. No one had offered me a ride. No one had asked. The ceremony began at 4 o'clock. An usher in a charcoal suit guided me down the aisle. I assumed he'd seat me in the front row or at least the second. I was the groom's mother. That's where mothers sit. But he led me past the first row, past the second, past the third. He stopped at row 8. "Here you go, ma'am," he said politely, gesturing to an empty seat near the aisle. I stared at him. "I'm Lucas's mother." He blinked, confused. "Oh, let me check the seating chart." He walked away. I stood there, clutching my purse, feeling every eye in the room on me. He returned a moment later, apologetic but firm. "Sorry, ma'am. This is correct." I sat down in row 8. Around me were colleagues of Richard Whitmore's, people I'd never met, people who didn't know who I was. When Ashton walked down the aisle, she was stunning, radiant. Lucas looked at her like she was the only person in the world. I felt a pang in my chest, not jealousy, but longing. I wanted him to look at me like that, just once, the way he used to when he was small and I was his whole world. The ceremony was beautiful. I cried, partly from joy, partly from grief, for Robert, who should have been there, for the space I was supposed to occupy but didn't. At 5:30, the cocktail hour began in the grand ballroom. I stood near a tall window with a glass of champagne I didn't drink, watching guests laugh and mingle. I didn't know anyone. No one approached me. Then Janet found me. "Helen?" She looked flustered. "Why aren't you in the family photos?" I blinked. I wasn't called. "You're the groom's mother," Janet said louder than I would have liked. "I know. Then why?" "I don't know Janet." Through the glass doors, I could see them on the terrace. Lucas and Ashton at the center, Richard and Camilla Whitmore on one side. The bridesmaids and groomsmen fanned out behind them. The photographer moved between them, adjusting poses, checking light. They looked perfect, like a magazine spread, like a family, and I stood inside looking out. Lucas glanced toward the window. Our eyes met. I saw it gilt, clear as day, but he didn't move, didn't wave me over, didn't say a word to the photographer. He just looked away. Janet grabbed my arm. "This is ridiculous. I'm going to say something." "Don't," I said quickly. "Please, not today." "Helen, I don't want to make a scene." She stared at me, her expression a mix of anger and pity. "You're too good for them." I wasn't sure that was true, but I nodded anyway. When the seating chart was announced, I found my name. Near the kitchen, far from the head table, far from the Whitmores, far from Lucas. It was the farthest seat from family you could have without being asked to leave. I stood there for a long moment staring at my name on the card. My hands were shaking. A server passed by with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. The kitchen doors swung open behind me, releasing a burst of heat and noise. I sat down at table 18, alone, and I realized with a sick, sinking clarity that this wasn't an oversight. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. They had placed me here, at the edge, out of sight, out of mind. I had been erased from my own son's wedding, and the worst part, Lucas had let them. I sat among strangers and tried to pretend my heart wasn't breaking. Dinner was served at 6:45. The couple beside me, colleagues of Richard Whitmore's, I gathered, spoke politely about the venue, the flowers, the ceremony. I nodded and smiled and said the right things. My chicken went cold on my plate. I couldn't taste any of it. Across the room at table 12, Janet kept glancing over. Her expression was tight with worry. I gave her a small wave, trying to reassure her. "I'm fine. Don't worry." I wasn't fine. From where I sat, I could see the head table clearly. Lucas and Ashton at the center, glowing under the chandelier light. Richard and Camilla Whitmore on one side, beaming with pride. The bridal party laughing, toasting, passing dishes. Lucas never looked my way, not once. I kept waiting, hoping. Maybe after dinner, maybe during the toasts. Maybe he'd come over just for a moment and say something, anything. He didn't. The first dance began at 7:30. Lucas and Ashton moved across the floor to some romantic ballad I didn't recognize. She rested her head on his shoulder. He smiled down at her. The room watched enchanted. I clapped along with everyone else. My hands felt numb. Then came the toasts. Isaac stood first. He spoke about Lucas with warmth and humor stories from college late-night study sessions, the time Lucas tried to cook Thanksgiving dinner and nearly set the dorm kitchen on fire. "Lucas is one of the most loyal people I know," Isaac said, his voice steady. "And Helen, his mom, is the reason why. She taught him what it means to show up for people you love." He raised his glass toward me. For a moment, the room turned. People looked. Some smiled politely. Others looked confused, as if they hadn't realized I was there. I knotted my throat tight and lifted my glass. It was the only time all night anyone acknowledged me. Richard Whitmore spoke next. His toast was grand and polished, full of references to legacy excellence and the bright future ahead for our two families. He talked about Ashton's achievements, Lucas's career, the partnership they represented. He never mentioned me, not once. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Richard sat down satisfied and Camilla kissed his cheek. At 8:10, the DJ's voice crackled over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, the bride would like to say a few words." Ashton stood smoothing her gown. She took the microphone from the DJ with a gracious smile and held up a small note card in her other hand. The room quieted. I felt something twist in my stomach, something cold and sharp. There was something about the way she smiled, confident, almost triumphant, that reminded me of last night, of librarian chic, of the way she'd looked at me like I was a stain she couldn't quite scrub out. I glanced toward Lucas. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. Proud, maybe, or nervous. I couldn't tell. Janet caught my eye from across the room. She looked tense, her jaw set. Ashton's voice rang out clear and amplified, filling every corner of the ballroom. "I want to talk about family." She began her tone warm and practiced. "About where we come from and where we're going." The room leaned in. I gripped the edge of the table. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. In the way her smile didn't reach her eyes. In the way she glanced briefly toward the head table where Richard and Camilla sat, watching their faces calm and expectant. This wasn't spontaneous, this was planned, and I had no idea what was coming. Ashton began sweetly thanking her parents, thanking Lucas, talking about love and partnership and new beginnings. And then her tone changed. I want to acknowledge Lucas's mother, Helen. Where are you, Helen? A spotlight swung across the ballroom. It landed on me. Table 18, near the kitchen, frozen in my chair. Stand up, Helen, don't be shy. My legs moved before my brain could catch up. I stood trembling as 220 faces turned toward me. I could feel every eye in the room. Some people were laughing already, performative, anticipatory laughter from Ashton's bridesmaids near the front. But others looked curious, confused. A few older guests glanced at each other uncertain. The spotlight was hot, too hot. I could feel sweat forming at my temples. Helen Bradford. Ashton said, her voice warm and amplified. A retired librarian. Widowed for 10 years. Raised Lucas all by herself. A pause. Helen represents sacrifice. For a moment I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was going somewhere kind. Maybe she was about to say something generous. I was wrong. Helen comes from a very different world. Ashton continued, her smile perfectly in place. A very humble world. Very working class. A few uncertain laughs rippled through the room. I saw Lucas shift in his seat. He didn't look at me. She lives in a little house in St. John's, the affordable part of Portland. Louder laughter now. My face burned. My vision narrowed to just Ashton's face, that perfect practice smile and the microphone in her hand. Helen actually offered us $5,000 as a wedding gift. Ashton's tone was light, almost teasing. $5,000. The ballroom erupted in laughter. I heard someone near the bar, one of Richard Whitmore's colleagues, shout, "That's probably half her pension." More laughter, louder this time, gleeful. Ashton tilted her head, her expression dripping with false sympathy. She was so proud to contribute, like it was some grand gesture. My hands gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles went white. My vision blurred. I glanced toward the head table. Lucas's face was red. He was staring at his plate now, not at me. Ashton's hand was on his arm, squeezing gently, possessive. "But you know what?" Ashton went on, her voice rising with theatrical warmth. Helen taught Lucas something incredibly valuable. She showed him exactly the kind of life he needed to escape. A beat. The room held its breath. The small house, the simple job, the mediocrity. The silence lasted only a second, and then the laughter came again, harder this time, meaner. I saw a woman at table 6, an older colleague of Lucas's, look down at her plate, uncomfortable. But the people around her were laughing, clapping even. And then Camilla Whitmore stood. She moved with the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of being listened to. She took the microphone from Ashton with a practiced smile and turned to face me directly. "Helen, dear." Camilla said, her voice smooth and cutting. "There are people in this world who are meant to do great things. And then there are people who are meant to support those people." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You've always known your place. That's admirable." The laughter exploded. It wasn't polite anymore. It wasn't nervous. It was gleeful, cruel, performative. I stood there under the spotlight, unable to move, unable to breathe. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might collapse. Ashton took the microphone back, her smile victorious. "So let's raise a glass," she said, lifting her champagne flute high, "to Helen Bradford. The woman who taught my husband that hard work can help you escape where you started." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room. "Thank you, Helen, for being a cautionary tale." 220 glasses lifted. Applause thundered through the ballroom. Some people were cheering. I tasted bile. My ears rang. The champagne I'd barely touched sat bitter on my tongue. I looked toward the head table one last time. Lucas's face was flushed, red. Ashton was squeezing his hand, leaning into him, whispering something that made her smile widen. He was staring at me now, and in that look I saw it. Not surprise. He had known. He had known this was coming, and he had let it happen. My son, the boy I had worked 3 jobs to put through college, the boy I had given everything for, had sat there and let his wife tear me apart in front of 200 people for entertainment. Ashton sat down beaming and kissed Lucas on the cheek. The room buzzed with conversation as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't just been gutted in front of everyone. I tried to sit, but my legs wouldn't work. I stood there shaking one hand still gripping the table, and then I saw a movement at the head table. Isaac Fletcher, the best man. He hadn't laughed, not once. His jaw was clenched, his hands were balled into fists, and he was walking. If you're still watching, if your heart is breaking like mine was in that moment, please leave a comment below. Let me know you're here with me. I need to know I'm not alone in feeling this. And a quick note, what comes next includes some details that have been changed or dramatized to protect privacy. If that bothers you, I understand you can stop here. But if you want to know what happened after that ballroom went silent, stay with me. Every step Isaac took toward the stage was deliberate, purposeful, the kind of walk that makes a room go quiet. Guests turned in their seats. Whispers died mid-sentence. Ashton's smile faltered. Isaac, what's... He reached the stage and took the microphone from her hand, firm but not aggressive. I need to say something. He turned to face the crowd. 220 people stared back. I'm Isaac Fletcher, best man. I've known Lucas since college, and I've known Helen Bradford almost as long. My tears were falling now. I couldn't stop them. When I was 20, Isaac said, his voice steady, I was in a car accident, shattered my femur, nearly lost my leg. I spent 6 weeks in a hospital in Portland. The room was silent. Lucas visited me once, right in the middle of midterms. I understood. He was busy. Finals were coming. It's fine. A pause. But Helen Bradford visited me 12 times. My breath caught. Each trip was 3 hours round trip from St. John's. She brought books, soup, sat with me during physical therapy sessions when I wanted to quit. When I was so angry, I couldn't see straight. I didn't know Lucas had told him. I didn't know anyone knew. She wasn't my mother, Isaac continued. I barely knew her, but she showed up, because that's who she is. He turned, looking directly at Ashton. So when you mock her life, her home, and her $5,000 gift money that you accepted and spent, gasps rippled through the crowd. You're insulting the woman who sacrificed everything so Lucas could become the man you decided was worth marrying. Richard Whitmore stood. Young man, that's enough. I'm not finished. Isaac's voice didn't rise, but it cut through the room like a blade. He turned back to Lucas. Lucas, stand up. Lucas didn't move. Lucas, stand up and defend your mother. Slowly, shakily, Lucas rose to his feet. His face was pale. His hands trembled. Did you know about this speech? Isaac asked. Silence. 220 people held their breath. Lucas's voice came out in a whisper. She showed me a draft. I told her to tone it down. The ballroom exploded. Voices erupted, chairs scraped, people turned to each other in shock. Isaac didn't flinch. You told her to tone it down, he repeated slowly, but you didn't stop it. Lucas opened his mouth, closed it. No words came. You didn't stop it, Isaac said again louder. You let your wife humiliate your mother in front of 200 people because you were too much of a coward to say no. I thought she would, Lucas started. You thought wrong, Isaac snapped. And your mother paid the price for your cowardice. I tried to speak. Isaac, don't. But he kept going. One more thing, Isaac said, turning back to the crowd. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He held it up. I've been live streaming this reception for my grandmother in Seattle. She's in the hospital and couldn't travel. Right now, 63 people are watching online. Ashton's face went white. They heard every word you said, Ashton. Every word I said. Every word Lucas didn't say. He looked directly at her. This isn't going away. Ashton lunged forward. You recorded without permission. Isaac's expression didn't change. I announced it at cocktail hour. You were too busy laughing to notice. He set the microphone down on the stage with a soft thunk. The room was dead silent. Then Isaac turned and walked toward me. He stopped beside table 18 and extended his hand. Mrs. Bradford, let me get you out of here. I took his hand. My legs barely held me. As we walked toward the exit, I glanced back. Just once. Lucas was still standing at the head table, frozen between his bride and his guilt. His mouth opened maybe to call out to me, but no sound came. Ashton grabbed his arm, her expression a mix of fury and panic. Camilla sat rigid, her face pale. Richard was on his phone already trying to control the damage, and the guests, 220 of them, sat in stunned, uncomfortable silence. Isaac pushed open the ballroom doors. Cool night air rushed in. Keep walking, he said quietly. I did, one foot in front of the other. Behind us, the murmurs started. Low at first, then louder. By the time we reached the lobby, I could hear the chaos spilling out of the ballroom. Raised voices, accusations, panic. Isaac didn't look back. He walked me all the way to my car in the parking garage, opened the door for me, made sure I was inside. Are you okay to drive? He asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure it was true. Thank you, I whispered. He shook his head. You don't thank someone for doing what's right. He closed the door gently. I sat there for a long moment, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. And then I realized something. My son had made his choice. He had chosen Ashton, chosen approval, chosen comfort over courage, and I had to choose too. Isaac drove me home in silence. What do you say to someone whose world just collapsed? He didn't try to fill the quiet with reassurances or empty comfort. He just drove his hands steady on the wheel, his presence solid and calm. At 9 o'clock, he pulled up in front of my house in St. John's. Do you want me to stay? He asked. I can sleep on the couch. I don't think you should be alone right now. I shook my head. I need to be alone. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Strength isn't never falling apart, he said quietly. It's what you do after. I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight. Isaac got out, walked around, and opened my door. Then he did something I didn't expect. He hugged me, not a polite, brief hug, a real one, the kind Robert used to give me when the world felt too heavy. I broke. I cried into Isaac's shoulder, deep, ugly sobs I'd been holding back all night. He didn't pull away. He just stood there steady until I had nothing left. You deserved better, he said softly. You still do. Then he got back in his car and drove away. I walked into my house and kicked off my shoes. The silence was deafening. On the mantel sat a framed photo, me, Robert, and 5-year-old Lucas at Cannon Beach in 1992. Lucas was holding a bucket, grinning at the camera. Robert's arm was around my shoulders. We looked happy. I picked up the photo, my hands trembling. I'm sorry, Robert, I whispered. I let them hurt our boy. I let them hurt me. My phone buzzed, Lucas calling. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the green button. I didn't answer. It rang again and again. Then a text came through. Lucas, Mom, please, I'm so sorry. I didn't know she'd be that cruel. I typed back, you knew enough. But I deleted it before sending. Another call. Ashton. I blocked the number. Another. Richard Whitmore. Blocked. A text from Camilla Whitmore. You're overreacting. It was a joke. Tell your friend to take that video down. Blocked. By midnight, I had 53 missed calls. At 1 a.m, Janet texted, Janet, I'm here when you're ready. Me. Not yet. I changed into my nightgown and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Robert's voice echoed in my head. Take care of our boy, darling. I had. I'd given Lucas everything. My time, my money, my pride, and he had let his wife destroy me in front of 200 people. I did take care of him. I said aloud to the empty room. But who's going to take care of me? The silence didn't answer. I didn't sleep. I lay there replaying the night. Ashton's voice, the laughter, Lucas's guilt-stricken face, Isaac's defense, the drive home. The realization that my son, my only child, had chosen comfort over courage, chosen a woman who saw me as a punchline, chosen silence over standing up for the person who gave him everything. At 9:15 the next morning, my phone buzzed, a text from Janet, 3 screenshots attached, and one line that made my stomach drop. Janet, Helen, you need to see this. I'm so sorry. The first screenshot loaded. A group chat. Wedding planning. Ashton's name at the top, 4 bridesmaids below, and a message from 2 weeks before the wedding. Ashton, OMG, I finalized my speech. It is brutal. I scrolled. 47 messages. A voice memo from Ashton. I pressed play. Her voice bright and cheerful, reading the full draft of her speech. It was worse than what she'd actually said. Crueler. More specific. Lines about my pathetic wardrobe, my embarrassing attempts to fit in, the way I clung to Lucas like he owed me something. I stopped the recording. My hands were shaking. Courtney, make the old hag cry Ashton. That's the goal. If she cries, Lucas will be too embarrassed to bring her around again. Tiffany, what if Lucas gets mad? Ashton, he won't. He's too weak. I showed him an edited version. He barely pushed back. I covered my mouth. A photo. My $5,000 check. Ashton, old lady, thinks this is a fortune. Courtney, did you even deposit it, Ashton? Oh yeah, paid for 2 Botox appointments. Laughter emojis, dozens of them. Ashton. By the end of the night, Helen will know she doesn't belong. Tiffany Savage. I love it. Ashton. She's trash. Blue collar. Peasant class. Lucas deserves better than that legacy. More replies, more slurs, more cruelty. Words I won't repeat. I dropped the phone. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. Again and again. Until there was nothing left. I collapsed onto the floor, my back against the tub, my body shaking. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't stress or nerves or poor judgment. This was a planned execution. And my son had known. My phone rang. Lucas. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I answered. Mom, thank God you knew, I said. My voice was flat, empty. Silence. Mom, you knew about the speech. She showed you a draft. You knew she was going to humiliate me. The draft she showed me was way lighter. Lighter. I repeated slowly. So a little humiliation was acceptable. I should have... Yes, I snapped. You should have stopped the wedding. You should have protected me. You should have been a man. Mom, I love you. Do you? My voice cracked. Because love protects Lucas. Love shows up. You sat there and let it happen. He was crying now. I could hear it in his breath. What do you want me to do? He whispered. Turn back time, I said quietly. Be the man your father raised you to be. A pause. Since that's impossible. I continued. Leave me alone, Mom. I hung up, and then I blocked his number. My phone rang again immediately. Janet, I answered. Did you see them? She asked. I saw. Now what are you going to do? I don't know, I said. My voice was hollow. But I can't keep letting people treat me like I'm disposable. You're worth 10 of them, Janet said fiercely. I'm starting to believe that. I didn't leave the house for 3 days. I ignored the doorbell, let the calls go to voicemail, deleted the angry messages from Camilla and Richard without reading them. I sat in Robert's chair by the window and stared at the garden he'd planted 20 years ago. The roses were blooming, bright and defiant. On the 3rd day, Tuesday night, there was a knock at the door. Not the doorbell, a knock. Firm. Deliberate. I stood slowly, my legs stiff from sitting too long. Through the peephole, I saw him, Lucas. I almost didn't open the door. It was 7:30 in the evening. The sky was black. The porch light flickered. but something pushed me forward. When I opened the door, I saw my son standing on the porch, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His hair was a mess. His eyes were bloodshot. Stubble covered his jaw. His shirt was wrinkled untucked. "I told you to leave me alone," I said. "I left her," Lucas said. I blinked. "What?" "I left Ashton. I found the group chat. The real one." "Mom, I didn't know it was that bad." I stepped aside. "Come in." In the living room, Lucas sat on the couch. I sat in Robert's chair deliberately, keeping distance. "Talk," I said. Lucas rubbed his face. "Friday, I found her iPad. She'd left it unlocked. I saw the group chat icon and I read everything." He looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed. "She called you trash mom. She said she married me to upgrade from the working class. She said you were an embarrassment she needed to erase." I said nothing. "I confronted her," Lucas continued. "She didn't even apologize. She said I'd be nothing without her, that I came from nothing." His voice cracked. "I told her I'd rather come from nothing than become nothing, and then I left." "Where are you staying?" I asked. "A hotel. I filed for annulment this morning." I sat back in the chair, Robert's chair, the one he used to sit in when Lucas came home from school with problems he couldn't solve. Lucas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm sorry." I felt tears slide down my face. I didn't wipe them away. "You knew about the speech," I said quietly. "I did. You stood there and watched her destroy me." "I did." "Your father would be ashamed." Lucas flinched like I'd struck him. "I know. I'm ashamed too." "Then why didn't you stop her?" My voice rose. "Why didn't you stand up and say no? Because I was a coward," he said, his voice breaking. "I told myself it wasn't that bad. I convinced myself it was just nerves, just wedding stress. I prioritized not making a scene over protecting you." "That's not good enough." "I know." I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet, dark. 10 years, I said softly. 10 years of sacrifice. The first time you had to choose between me and a better life. You chose the life. "I'm trying to choose right now," Lucas said. I turned to face him. "You're here because you found evidence," I said. "Not because you stood up in that ballroom. You're here because being guilty is more convenient now than staying silent was then." He didn't argue. "So what do I do?" he whispered. "How do I fix this? I don't know if you can." He looked up at me stricken. "Are you saying you don't want me in your life anymore?" "I'm saying I need time," I said. "Space to figure out who I am when I'm not bending myself into shapes for you." How long?" "I don't know, weeks, months, maybe I'll call. But right now I can't look at you without seeing that ballroom." Lucas stood, tears streaming down his face. "I love you, Mom." My throat tightened. "I love you too. That's why this hurts so much. You knew better. I raised you better." "I know." "But knowing isn't enough," I said. "You have to do better. And I don't know if you can." He nodded slowly, his shoulders shaking. I walked to the door and opened it. "You should go." He walked to the threshold and stopped. "When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here." I didn't answer. He stepped out onto the porch. The night air rushed and cold and sharp. "I'm going to therapy," he said quietly. "I'm going to figure out why I let fear control me. I'm going to be better." "Good," I said. "But do it for yourself, not for me." He nodded. Then he turned and walked down the steps. I watched him get into his car, watched the headlights flare to life, watched him drive away, and then I closed the door. I stood there for a long time, my hand on the doorknob, my forehead pressed against the wood. I had just turned my son away, the boy I'd worked 3 jobs to raise, the boy I'd given everything for, and it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But it was also the rightest. I closed the door, locked it. Then I slid down to the floor, my back against the wood, and let myself fall apart. That was 5 weeks ago. I still haven't spoken to Lucas, but I know he's alive. I know he's trying. Janet updates me once a week, whether I ask or not. The annulment was finalized in week 4. Ashton was let go from her marketing firm after the video went viral. The Whitmores threatened to sue Isaac for defamation, but their lawyer told them they'd lose. Lucas calls Janet every Sunday. "Is she okay?" he asks. Janet tells me he quit his tech job. He's working for a non-profit now, something about housing access for low-income families. He's in therapy twice a week. Last week, Janet relayed a message. "Tell Mom I'm becoming the man Dad could be proud of, even if it's too late." I didn't respond, but I didn't ask her to stop telling me either. I've been seeing a therapist too. Dr. Morgan Hayes. She's kind, patient, and doesn't let me get away with anything. "Boundaries aren't cruelty," she told me in our second session. "They're self-respect." I'm learning what that means. I've been volunteering at Woodlawn Elementary Library again, not as staff, just as a reader. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, I sit in the corner with a stack of picture books and a circle of 6-year-olds who hang on every word. Last week, a little girl named Amaya asked me, "Miss Helen, why do you always smile when you read to us?" I didn't have an answer then, but I do now, because for the first time in a long time, I'm doing something just for the joy of it. Not because someone needs me, not because I'm proving my worth, just because it makes me happy. The community has been kind. Cards from former students, letters from parents whose kids I helped learn to read, more than 50 thank you notes from the library, over 80 from people at church. I joined a book club, made a friend named Margaret who's also estranged from her daughter. We meet for coffee on Saturdays and talk about everything and nothing. I bought a red dress and wore it to church last Sunday. It felt bold, defiant, free. I planted roses in the backyard, yellow ones, the kind Robert loved. Right now I'm sitting at my kitchen table typing this story. My phone buzzes, a text from Lucas. I unblocked him 2 weeks ago. I don't reply, but I read them. Lucas' mom. "I planted roses at my new place. Yellow ones, like the ones Dad used to grow. They remind me of you. I hope you're okay." I stare at the message for a long time. I don't reply. I don't delete it either. I set the phone down and look at the framed photo on the table. Robert. Lucas. Me. Cannon Beach, 1992. "I kept my promise," I whisper. "I took care of our boy. But now I'm taking care of myself, too. You'd understand." Outside, the sun is setting. The roses are blooming. I walk out into the garden hose in hand and water them slowly, one by one. The air smells like summer, like hope. And I realize something. I don't know if Lucas and I will ever fully heal. Maybe. Maybe his actions will rebuild what his silence broke. But my healing doesn't depend on him anymore. That's the most powerful thing I've learned. If you've ever been made to feel small by people who were supposed to lift you up, you're not overreacting. You're not too sensitive. You are not the problem. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. And you decide who gets to walk through. Family should be safe. If yours isn't, you have the right to step back. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate. I tolerated disrespect for too long. I won't anymore. And neither should you. I don't know what happens next. Maybe Lucas and I will sit down one day and talk. Maybe he'll show me those yellow roses. Maybe I'll forgive him. Or maybe I won't. But either way, I'll be okay. Because I've learned something Robert tried to teach me 20 years ago, something I forgot along the way. I am enough. Not because of what I sacrificed, not because of who I raised, not because of who needs me, just because I exist. And that more than anything is worth protecting. Looking back now, I see the pattern so clearly. I spent 10 years bending myself into smaller and smaller shapes, trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. I told myself it was love. I told myself it was sacrifice. I told myself that's what good mothers do. But God didn't call me to be small. He didn't create me to be erased. And if you're watching this, if any part of my story feels familiar, please don't do what I did. Don't silence yourself to keep the peace. Don't shrink to make others comfortable. Don't let anyone, family, friends, or strangers treat you like you're disposable. Family drama stories like mine are more common than you think. So many of us carry the weight of toxic relationships, especially when it comes to in-laws, children, or spouses who demand everything and give nothing back. And grandma stories of older women being pushed aside, mocked, or dismissed, they happen every single day. I thought I was alone. I wasn't, and neither are you. Here's what I learned. Lesson 1: boundaries are not betrayal. For years, I thought setting boundaries meant I didn't love Lucas enough. But love without respect is just people-pleasing, and people-pleasing will destroy you. God gave us the wisdom to know when to walk away. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life." I didn't guard mine. I gave it away freely, even to people who treated it like trash. Lesson 2: silence is complicity. Lucas didn't write that speech, but he knew about it, and he said nothing. In so many family drama stories, the most dangerous person isn't always the villain, it's the bystander, the one who loves you but won't fight for you. If someone can watch you be humiliated and stay silent, they've already chosen a side, and it's not yours. Lesson 3: you teach people how to treat you. I tolerated disrespect for too long. I accepted crumbs and called it love. I let Ashton, Camilla, and even Lucas treat me like I was less than because I was afraid of losing them. But you can't lose what you never truly had. And you can't build a relationship on shame. Too many grandma stories end this way, with women realizing too late that they gave their whole lives to people who never valued them. Lesson 4: healing doesn't require forgiveness from others. It requires honesty with yourself. I don't know if Lucas and I will ever fully reconcile. Maybe we will. Maybe we won't. But my peace doesn't depend on his apology anymore. God has shown me that my worth isn't tied to who stays or who leaves. It's tied to him, and that's enough. If you're in a situation like mine, if you're being manipulated, excluded, mocked, or erased, listen to me. You are not overreacting. You are not too sensitive. You are not the problem. I've heard so many grandma stories from women who reached out after my video went viral. Women who gave everything and were told it wasn't enough. Women who were shamed for their class, their education, their past. Women who were loved conditionally. These are the same patterns we see in family drama stories across generations. Control, exclusion, and emotional manipulation disguised as family loyalty. Don't let that be your story. Stand up, speak up, set boundaries, walk away if you have to, and trust that God will hold you through it. Thank you for listening to my story. If it helped you in any way, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you have your own family drama stories or grandma stories to share, I'd love to hear them in the comments. You're not alone. Final note: this content contains dramatized storytelling elements for educational purposes. Some details are fictionalized, but the core lessons about recognizing financial and emotional abuse are real. If this style isn't for you, that's okay. Please seek content that better fits your needs. May God bless you, and may you always know your worth.